Hey guys, Sean here and welcome to the F1 Word. Now this week on the channel I'm going to be having a look at a couple of topics from 2017 that I haven't really covered but probably really should have. Kind of in an attempt to round off 2017. Yes, I know it's February, but we are getting so close now to the build-up and the car launches, testing. The season's not a million miles away, so it just feels like the right week to round everything off. Today then, I'm going to be taking a look at why Daniil Kvyat was dropped from Red Bull entirely and offer my opinions on the whole situations. I will start off, as I often do in these videos, with what I guess you could call a timeline of events, followed by my opinions, and then very quickly, what I think the future could hold for the Russian. Jumping all the way back to his GP3 days then, and Red Bull were absolutely raving about him at the time. From what I remember, he was seen as the next big thing and certainly looked as though that was the case at the time. He was very quick, he wrapped up the GP2 title and within no time at all was swiftly promoted to Toro Rosso. However, in his first season with the junior outfit, he was comprehensively beaten by teammate Jean-Eric Vergne and finished the season with just 8 points, which made what happened next all the more surprising. He actually ended up, as we know, taking Sebastian Vettel's seat at Red Bull. At the time, many believed, and certainly I believed, that Jean-Eric Vergne was next in line at Red Bull, so I was completely surprised when Daniil Kvyat got that seat. I was absolutely adamant at the time, certainly given that he'd already missed out to Daniel Ricciardo, that Jean-Eric Vergne would be in that Red Bull. There was just no doubt in my mind, but that's not the way it played out. There are a fair few people out there that criticise Daniil Kvyat a lot, and they seem to forget, and it is only, the vocal minority that seem to forget this. Most of us know this, but Daniil Kvyat actually beat Daniel Ricciardo in their first season together as teammate, despite the fact he had fewer retirements or failures to start. Alright, it wasn't by a massive margin, it was only by a few points, but still, he did that. The problem for him at the time, and a problem for Red Bull as well, a very nice problem to have to be fair, was that there was a young man named Max Verstappen absolutely thrashing his Toro Rosso around and setting F1's midfield alight. He comfortably beat the equally highly rated Carlos Sainz over the course of that first season together, and that kind of put Red Bull in a very, very tough position. It was clear and obvious that they wanted Verstappen in that car, but dropping a driver who had just had a fairly strong first season wouldn't look good on a team. Yes, Red Bull go about their business differently to a lot of teams, but they would want to save face if they could on it. We then move into 2016, of course, we all know what happened there, but when you go back to the very start of the season, Daniil Kvyat actually looked pretty much on par with teammate Ricciardo. If you take out his failure to start the Australian Grand Prix because of mechanical issues, and we assume, which I know is a dangerous thing to do, but if we just assume that he finished just behind Ricciardo, 5th, maybe 6th place, there would have been very few points between them. He also picked up the team's only podium in the first few Grand Prix with that one at China. However, we then reached the crunch point, I guess is the way to put it, and that was a diabolical Russian Grand Prix weekend from Kvyat. It really was terrible, and that gave Red Bull the opportunity to drop him. He was put back in the Toro Rosso, and it's fair to say, if we're being completely honest, he never really recovered. He picked up just 4 points for the rest of the season. If you compare that to teammate Carlos Sainz, it's just a huge chasm between them. I think Carlos Sainz picked up over 40 points in the same period of time. Unfortunately for Kvyat, things didn't improve at all in 2017. With just 4 points on the board, Toro Rosso took the decision to drop him after the Singapore Grand Prix. He did return, as we know, for the US Grand Prix, which ironically saw him pick up his first point since Spain and the team's last point of the season. But that would be the last we would see of Daniil Kvyat in 2017 on the grid, and it could well be the end of his Formula One racing career. We'll come to that a little bit later on. So they were the facts, but on to my opinion then. And first off, there is no doubt whatsoever in my mind that Red Bull had already decided they wanted Max Verstappen in the first team for 2016. That was already decided. As I said earlier, because Daniil Kvyat hadn't really done anything wrong to that point, they needed an excuse to drop him, a decent excuse. Like I said earlier, they don't go about their business in the same way as other teams, but at the same time, they want to save face as best they can. And he gave them that excuse in Russia. So when you look at it from the Red Bull perspective, you really can't blame them. But I don't think this was down to one race result. I don't think this was down to one set of incidents. I mean, when they got to Russia, he was under massive pressure from the team. They really were leaning on him. And those mistakes that he made kind of showed that. Yeah, he's a hot-headed driver. Yes, he's aggressive. Yes, he's made big mistakes in the past and since that. But they just looked like the mistakes from a driver that was under pressure. So he should face criticism for that, there's no doubt about it. But like I've already said, I don't think Red Bull just took that incident into account. Yes, he outscored Ricciardo in his first season with the team, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's better than Ricciardo as a driver. If you take into account factors such as luck or mechanical issues or team strategy errors, the points tally doesn't always tell the full story. Yes, of course, points mean prizes. I know that, but it was plainly obvious and still is that Daniil Ricciardo is just the quicker driver. And if I put myself in Red Bull's position for a minute, I would also have been very, very keen to get Max Verstappen in that car as quickly as possible. He was clearly a talent, and with the benefit of hindsight, it was absolutely the right call. But that does not excuse the way that Red Bull treated Kvyat at the time or since. No, he may not have lived up to the hype and expectation, but the guy had huge boots to fill. I mean, a 4-time world champion, that was never going to be easy. Pushing all that aside though, and in complete and total honesty, I think one of the biggest mistakes Kvyat made, in my opinion, was not, I guess you could say, sucking up to the team bosses enough. You look at how Vettel was at Red Bull and how Ricciardo and Verstappen are. They are all massive personalities and understandably want what's best for their careers. However, they are all equally good at keeping the bosses at Red Bull on their good side. And that is not a criticism in the slightest. It just makes good sense. If you want a long-term career in Formula One and you want to be with a team, you need to keep the guy paying your wages happy. It's just good sense. I mean, look at it this way. It's no coincidence that Buemi, Verne, Kvyat, and I guess to some extent Carlos Sainz aren't driving for the first team or were dropped from the programme. Yeah, okay, Sainz is still part of the Red Bull family, he's on loan at Renault, but I don't see him returning to the team. I'm not saying they're going to drop him, but I can see him ended up staying at Renault for quite a while. But particularly when you look at Buemi, Verne and Kvyat, they are all drivers that were very comfortable speaking out about Red Bull and their own frustrations with the team. 2014 aside with Sebastian Vettel, but for the most part, Vettel, Ricciardo and Verstappen never really go on the attack with Red Bull. Yes, of course they vent their frustrations. Yes, they get annoyed with reliability problems, but they never really openly criticise the team. And of course, that keeps the bosses happy, so they're more likely to get a new contract and stick around. So I think that is part of the reason why Daniil Kvyat really never settled at Red Bull, or that they really settled with him. But what I will say is that what Red Bull have done for F1 over the years is incredible. And not just as a team, but as a sponsor as well. Right back to the 90s when they're sponsoring Sauber. They've invested so much time, effort, and a hell of a lot of their own money into the sport. And they've given us some exceptional talent in return, including a 4-time world champion. So, as frustrating as it is and as unfairly as I genuinely feel they treated Kvyat, ultimately, it's their team, their business, and their money. And they can do with it what they choose. I just personally feel it would have been better for Kvyat, and Red Bull would have saved face if they just let him see out 2017. He couldn't have done any worse than Gasly and Hartley. I'm not saying they did a bad job, but they didn't pick up any points. Reliability wasn't on side, so the worst case scenario was that Kvyat kept retiring with reliability problems and had no points, but at least at the end of 2017, he's seen out the season, and therefore his contract, Red Bull have saved face, and he's probably not going to get quite the kick in the gut that he got in the end. Looking at the future, could we see him back in Formula One in a race seat anytime soon? I mean, he's in probably the right place in a lot of ways. Not necessarily Ferrari, but in the role that he has. He's there as their development driver. He's kind of out of the spotlight. Yes, he's still under pressure because it's Ferrari, but he's out of the spotlight. It's a chance to refocus, get his head right, and make a fresh bid for an F1 seat. I guess as well, he's also in the right place because Kimi Raikkonen's out of contract at the end of 2018, and with him already being under pressure, there are question marks over whether or not Ferrari are going to extend that deal. So if he absolutely nails it for Ferrari this year, he could end up with that second seat with the Scuderia. I don't think that will happen if I'm being completely honest, but the possibility is there. What I think is more likely is if Kimi Raikkonen leaves at the end of 2018 or Ferrari drop him, whichever way you want to look at it, that will open up the driver market massively, and that's going to allow drivers to move all over the place, and that could see seats at the likes of Haas and Alfa Sauber open up. And if Kvyat's impressed at Ferrari, there's no reason why he couldn't end up in one of their customer teams. I could really see him driving a Haas in 2019. They are just my opinions, of course, but how do you feel Red Bull handled the Kvyat situation, and do you think he will return to an F1 race seat in the future? Let me know in the comments down below. I will be back later in the week with another video, and don't forget to join us this Wednesday at 7 PM UK time for our live midweek Q&A. But in the meantime, don't forget to follow me on social media. Links to Facebook, to Twitter and to Discord are all in the description. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean. This has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.